So before we get into everything, I just want to ask you straight up. Did you ever think you would be sitting here talking about Michael Jackson and all of these allegations that keep coming out years after his passing? No. Honestly, no. When I was working with Mr. Jackson, I never in my life thought that one day I would be here trying to defend his name or respond to people who he trusted, people who he called family, coming out and saying things like this. It is really hard. It is really painful. And I think that is what people need to understand. These are not just accusations against some random celebrity. This is Michael Jackson. This is the king of pop. This is a man I spent years with. I was with him almost every single day. I saw how he lived. I saw who he loved. I saw what made him happy and what broke him down. And when I hear these things, I know firsthand that a lot of what is being said does not match the man that I knew. Let me start from the beginning, because I think people deserve the full picture. When I first started working with Mr. Jackson, I did not fully understand what I was walking into. You hear the name Michael Jackson, and you think you already know everything about this man. You think you understand his life because you have watched his videos, you have heard his music, you have read the tabloids, but nothing prepares you for actually being in his presence and realizing that everything the media has told you is either exaggerated or completely wrong. The man was gentle. I mean, genuinely gentle in a way that you do not often see from people who have that level of fame and power. He could have been arrogant. He could have been demanding and cold and disconnected. And maybe some people expected that. But that was not him. Not the man I knew. He was thoughtful. He cared about the people around him. He noticed things, small things. He would remember your birthday. He would ask about your kids. He would check in on you if he knew you were going through something hard. And one thing that people do not talk about enough is how funny he was. Mr. Jackson had a sense of humor that would catch you completely off guard. He would say something completely dry and deadpan and then just look at you with this little smile. He knew he got you. He enjoyed that. There was a lightness to him that the world never really got to see because every time a camera was pointed at him, there was always some kind of drama or controversy surrounding the moment. Now, let me get into the Sony situation because I think that is important context for understanding who Mr. Jackson was and why certain things happened the way they did. His issues with Sony were deep. This was not just some minor business disagreement. This man felt genuinely wronged. He felt like Sony had taken advantage of him. He felt like they had undermined him. And when Michael Jackson felt wronged, he did not just sit quietly and accept it. I remember one specific situation that still makes me shake my head when I think about it. We needed to get him some headphones for the studio. Simple enough, right? So we went out and we got a good pair of headphones. Nice ones. Studio quality. The problem was that when we brought them back, they had the Sony logo on them. We did not even think about it. It was just a pair of headphones. We gave them to him and everything seemed fine. Then later that evening, we went into the studio to turn the lights off and make sure everything was secure. And when I walked in, I saw those headphones sitting there in pieces. Not dropped by accident, not slightly damaged. Torn apart. 3 or 4 pieces scattered on the floor. The man had literally destroyed a brand new pair of headphones because it said Sony on them. That is how deep that feeling went for him. It was not performative. Nobody was watching. Nobody was filming. He just could not have that name around him. And I think that tells you something important about Mr. Jackson. When he committed to something, whether it was his music, his beliefs, or his convictions, he committed completely. There was no halfway with him. He did not do anything small. Everything was total. That same intensity is what made him one of the greatest artists who ever lived. He was always working on music. Always. People think that because he was the king of pop, because he had already sold hundreds of millions of records, that maybe he was coasting. Maybe he was just living off his legacy. That could not be further from the truth. This man was in the studio constantly. He never stopped creating. I would get emails from artists who wanted to collaborate with him. They would send me tracks and I would pass them along to him. And he would take those tracks and work on them with his engineer, who was in town at the time. He would transform them. He would add something to them that made them completely different, better, more alive. That was his gift. That was what he did. Being the king of pop was almost like a separate identity for him. It was like this alter ego that came alive on stage. But when you were around him in private, you were not with the king of pop. You were with Michael. Just Michael. And Michael was this incredibly curious, creative, sensitive human being who happened to also be capable of walking onto any stage in the world and commanding the attention of 100,000 people without breaking a sweat. He talked about music all the time. He talked about what he was working on, what sounds he was exploring, what he was trying to say with a particular song. He had a vision for everything. Nothing was accidental. Every single element of his art was intentional. And that is something I think gets lost sometimes when people talk about him. They reduce him to a controversy or a headline, but this was a man who thought deeply about everything he created. Now, I want to talk about Prince, because this is something that I think people have always been curious about, and there is a lot of misinformation out there about the relationship between those two men. We actually took Mr. Jackson to see Prince perform. Prince had a residency here in Las Vegas, and that was arranged by William. We went to the show. Mr. Jackson sat through the entire performance. He watched Prince do what Prince did, and you could tell he was engaged. He appreciated artistry. He always did, regardless of what was going on personally. He talked about women. He appreciated women. He had female friends who mattered to him. I remember times in Washington, D.C. when he had female companions with him, and they would go out late at night, sometimes 1 or 2 in the morning, and they would walk around the monuments. They would walk by the Lincoln Memorial. They would go along the Vietnam Veterans Wall, just walking, just being present in that moment together. And I would be nearby keeping an eye on things, and I could hear him in the back of the car or walking alongside, laughing, having real conversations, being genuinely connected to the people he was with. He was not cold. He was not disconnected. He was warm and present and engaged. And with women especially, he showed a tenderness that I think a lot of people never got to see. Beyoncé came up in conversation more than once. He called her beautiful, and that was not a throwaway comment. When Mr. Jackson said something, he meant it. He thought carefully about his words. He said she was beautiful, and he also deeply respected her as an artist. He saw what she was doing, and he recognized the talent and the dedication behind it. Whether there was anything deeper than admiration and appreciation between them, I honestly cannot say. I was not inside his heart. But I know that he saw her as someone truly special, both as a woman and as an entertainer. And I think that is an important thing to understand about him. He could hold both of those things at the same time. He could appreciate someone as an artist and also as a human being without it becoming something complicated or problematic. He had that capacity for genuine appreciation that I think is rarer than people realize. What I want people to take away from everything I am saying is this: Michael Jackson was a real human being. He was not a myth. He was not just a collection of headlines and controversies and tabloid stories. He was a man who had fears and passions and loyalties and wounds. He was a man who destroyed a pair of headphones, not because he was crazy, but because he felt deeply wronged, and that was how he expressed it. He was a man who went to see Prince perform and sat through the whole show because he respected great artistry, even when the personal relationship was complicated. He was a man who opened his life to people he considered family and trusted them completely and sometimes got hurt for it. He was someone who never stopped creating, never stopped working, never stopped pushing himself toward whatever the next level of his art was going to be. Even at the end of his life, he was working on new music. He was collaborating. He was building. He was not done. He was nowhere near done. And that is what makes all of this so painful. Because the man is not here to speak for himself. He cannot sit down and do an interview and say, this is who I am and this is what actually happened. He cannot look the Casio family in the eye and ask them why they are doing this. He cannot call up his fans and say, I hear you and I appreciate you and here is the truth. He is gone. And so everyone else gets to fill in the silence with whatever serves them best. But I was there. I was present for years of this man's life. I saw things that the cameras never saw, that the tabloids never knew about. I saw his kindness and his generosity and his deep, genuine love for the people around him. I saw his dedication to his craft and his absolute refusal to stop creating no matter what was happening in his personal life. I saw the way he loved his children with everything he had. I saw the way he mourned when people he trusted let him down. And I can tell you that the man deserves better than what is being done to his name and his legacy. He deserves for the truth to be told. He deserves for the people who actually knew him to speak up and say, this is who Michael Jackson really was. Not the version the tabloids created, not the version that certain people are now presenting in order to collect a settlement. The real version, the human version, the Michael that I knew. People ask me all the time what it was actually like to be around him on a daily basis. And I always tell them the same thing. It was unlike anything I have ever experienced before or since. There is no comparison. You cannot really prepare someone for what it is like to move through the world with Michael Jackson, because the world reacts to him in a way that it does not react to anyone else. I have worked with other high-profile people. I have been around fame before, but Michael was on a completely different level, completely different. When he walked into a room, something shifted. Even people who were trying to play it cool, trying to act like they were not affected, you could see it. You could see them recalibrate. Because there is something about being in the presence of someone who is that singular, that rare, that it does something to you whether you want it to or not, and yet he was always trying to find normalcy. That is something people do not understand about him. He was always searching for ordinary moments, simple things, walking around at night in D.C. with someone he cared about, going to see a show, working in the studio on a track he was excited about, eating a meal with people he felt comfortable with. These things mattered enormously to him because his whole life, those ordinary moments had been taken from him. He grew up on a stage. He grew up performing. He never had a childhood in any real sense of the word, and I think that is something that stayed with him his entire life. This longing for simplicity, for connection without the weight of expectation, for moments where he was just a person and not an icon. When I think about the Sony situation again, I think about it in that context. Because his fight with Sony was not just about business, it was about control. It was about ownership. It was about a black man who had created extraordinary work being told that he did not fully own what he had made. That the system he had built his career inside of was designed to take from him even as it elevated him. He was one of the first major artists to really understand the value of music publishing and to fight for it. He bought the Beatles catalog, and Sony did not like that. And that conflict became personal and painful in ways that affected him deeply. But after the show, they did not connect. Prince and Mr. Jackson never actually got together and had a real conversation, at least not on my watch. And for years, I wondered about that. I wondered what could have been if those two men had ever truly come together and collaborated. Because when you step back and look at both of their lives, they were almost mirror images of each other in so many ways. Both of them had serious, deep conflicts with their record labels. Both of them fought against the system that had made them famous because they understood that the system was also exploiting them. Both of them were incredibly private people, despite being the most public figures in the world. Both of them were Jehovah's Witnesses. Both of them were black men who had fought their entire careers to maintain creative control over their art and their legacy. They were so alike. And yet, for most of their lives, there was this perception of a rivalry between them. And I genuinely believe that rivalry was manufactured. I believe that on both sides, there were people, managers, label representatives, tabloid reporters, who were actively feeding each of them information designed to make them feel like the other one was against them. You tell Michael Jackson that Prince said he is better than him, Michael is going to feel some type of way about that. You tell Prince that Michael Jackson said he is better than Prince, Prince is going to feel the same way. You tell two incredibly competitive black men who are at the absolute top of their field that someone they respect does not respect them back. You know what is going to happen. They are going to pull back. They are going to put up walls. And that wall ended up keeping two of the greatest musical minds of the 20th century from ever truly connecting. Had those two men come together, had they actually collaborated, I genuinely believe they would have changed the entire music industry in ways we could not even fully imagine. They would have owned it. Between Michael's mass appeal and Prince's musical genius and range, there was nothing they could not have done together. That is one of the great what-ifs in music history, and it saddens me every time I think about it. But I said all of that to get to this, because understanding who Mr. Jackson was, understanding his sensitivity, his loyalty, his depth of feeling, that is the only way to properly respond to what has been coming out about the Casio family. When I first heard about these allegations, I was stunned. I mean, genuinely stopped in my tracks. Because I knew the Casio family. I did not just know of them, I knew them personally. I was there. I was present for so much of their relationship with Mr. Jackson. I personally took Mr. Jackson to their home. He stayed there for several months, not a visit, months. And in that time, the way they treated him, the way they treated me, the way they treated his children, was nothing but warmth and kindness and genuine affection. They were not just associates or acquaintances. They were referred to as his second family. And that is exactly what they seemed to be. His children were comfortable there. And if you know anything about Mr. Jackson, you know that he was extraordinarily protective of his children. He did not just let anyone into their world. The fact that those kids were at ease, that they felt safe and loved in that environment, that told you everything you needed to know about what kind of people the Casio family appeared to be. They came to visit Mr. Jackson in Virginia when we were staying there. They stayed at his home here in Las Vegas. It was a real relationship. It was mutual. It was ongoing. It was not just Mr. Jackson reaching out to them. It went both ways. And in all that time, in all those interactions, there was never a single moment that made me uncomfortable. Never a moment that made me question what was happening. In fact, and this is what really gets me, there were times when me and my team felt so confident that Mr. Jackson was in good hands with the Casio family that we would actually take the opportunity to step away for the evening. You have to understand what that means. I was responsible for this man's safety and well-being. I took that responsibility more seriously than anything else in my professional life. The fact that I felt comfortable enough to leave him in their care that tells you exactly what I thought of them at the time. And now here they come with these allegations. After he is gone, after he cannot speak for himself, after he cannot look them in the eye and respond to what they are saying, after he cannot sit across from them and ask them why. Why now? Why this? When I heard it, my first thought, and I'm being completely honest, was that this is a money grab. That is exactly what this is. Because, let me ask you something. If what they are alleging is true, if any of this actually happened the way they are claiming, then why were they still showing up? Why were they still coming to his home? Why were they still inviting him to their restaurant? Why were they still traveling to see him? When Mr. Jackson was alive, it was open arms. Come on in, sit down, stay as long as you want. We are family. And the moment he is gone, the moment he can no longer defend himself, suddenly there are all of these claims. I believe the estate may have already paid them something. I'm not certain about all the details, but that is the information I have. And that just makes it worse. Because then this becomes a pattern. This becomes a strategy. Come forward with allegations against a man who cannot respond, against an estate that has to protect its reputation, and collect. I am not saying this lightly. I knew these people. Part of me still cannot fully process it. Because when you know someone, when you break bread with them, when you watch them interact with children and elderly family members and see nothing but love, it is very hard to reconcile that with what is being alleged now. But I have seen enough in this world to know that money changes people. Desperation changes people. And when someone presents you with the opportunity to make a claim against one of the most famous estates in the world, against a man whose name still generates hundreds of millions of dollars every year, some people see that as too good an opportunity to pass up. Even if it means betraying someone who trusted them. Even if it means dragging the name of someone who treated them with nothing but kindness. It sickens me, genuinely. Because Mr. Jackson was not perfect, no human being is, but he was a good man. He was a man who loved deeply and gave generously, and trusted people. Sometimes more than he should have, and that trust kept getting used against him. Even when he was alive, the media, certain people around him, certain people who claimed to care about him, they used that openness and that trust against him over and over again. And now it is still happening. Even from beyond the grave, people are still trying to take something from him. And that is heartbreaking. Now I want to address something that people always bring up when they talk about Mr. Jackson. There is always this question about who he was in terms of the women in his life. And I can tell you, without any hesitation, that Michael Jackson loved women. This is something I witnessed personally and repeatedly. So when you see him tearing apart a pair of headphones because of a logo, understand that it was not a tantrum. It was a man expressing the full weight of what he felt about a company that he believed treated him unjustly. That is what it meant. That is how seriously he took it. And that same seriousness, that same depth of feeling, is what made him such an extraordinary artist. You cannot separate those two things. The intensity that drove him to destroy those headphones is the same intensity that drove him to rehearse for months to perfect a 30-second dance move. It is the same intensity that made him cry in the studio. When he felt like a song was not reaching the emotional truth he was looking for, everything came from the same place in him. I also want to say something about his relationship with his fans, because I think that gets overlooked a lot when people talk about him. Michael Jackson genuinely loved his fans. Not in that performative way where a celebrity says they love their fans because they know it is the right thing to say. He actually cared about them. He thought about them. He prayed for them. When his fans were outside, wherever he was staying, sometimes he would stand at the window and look out at them, and you could see something on his face that was just pure gratitude and love. He knew that without those people, none of it was possible. He knew that they had chosen him, that out of everything they could give their love and their energy and their money to, they had chosen him. And he took that seriously. He did not take it for granted, not even after decades of it. Not even at the end of his life when he was preparing for the This Is It shows and the world was waiting to see him perform again. He was nervous about those shows. People think he was always supremely confident and in control. And on stage, he was. But the human being behind that performance was someone who cared deeply about whether he was delivering for the people who believed in him. He wanted to give them everything. He wanted to show up completely. That was who he was. That is why I am here. That is why I'm talking. Because somebody has to say it. Somebody who was actually in the room has to stand up and tell the truth. And I am not going to let his memory be buried under a pile of allegations made by people who smiled in his face for years and waited until he was in the ground to say anything different. He trusted them. He welcomed them into his life and into the lives of his children. And they waited until he could not respond, and then they came with this. That is not justice. That is not truth. That is exactly what I said it was from the moment I heard it. It is a money grab, plain and simple. And Michael Jackson deserved so much better than that. People ask me if I ever think about those years and whether I would go back and do it all again. And the answer is yes, without hesitation. Because being around Michael Jackson, being trusted with his safety and his daily life, watching him create and perform and connect with people, that was a privilege. It was something most people will never experience, and I do not take a single day of it for granted. But with that privilege comes responsibility. And part of that responsibility is this, making sure the record is straight. Making sure that people who were not there, who do not know what actually happened, who are only hearing one side of a story being told by people with a financial incentive to tell it a certain way, making sure those people also hear from someone who was present. Someone who watched it all firsthand and has nothing to gain from saying anything other than the truth. The Casio family was given something rare. They were given access to one of the most private, most guarded, most carefully protected people on the planet. Michael Jackson did not let just anyone in he could not afford to. His whole life, people had tried to get close to him in order to take something from him. His time, his image, his trust, his money. He had been burned so many times that by the time I knew him, he had a very small circle of people he truly trusted. The Casio family was in that circle. They were welcomed in not because of their status or their connections, but because he genuinely felt safe with them. He felt loved by them. He felt like they saw him as a person and not as a commodity or a target. And for someone who had spent his entire life being seen as a product to be consumed and exploited, that feeling of being truly seen and accepted was everything. So for them to now come forward with these allegations, after all of that, after all those years of warmth and closeness and mutual trust, it is not just disappointing, it is a betrayal of something that was genuinely rare and precious. And I think deep down, no matter what they tell themselves to justify it, they know that. They know what they are doing and what they are erasing with it. Michael Jackson was not a perfect man. He had complicated relationships and difficult moments and painful periods in his life that I watched him navigate with more grace than most people could have managed. But he was a good man, a generous man, a man who gave of himself constantly to his art, to his fans, to the people he loved, and he deserved better from the Casio family. He deserved better from a lot of people who took his generosity and his trust and eventually used it against him, but he also deserved better from history. He deserved for the full truth of who he was to be preserved and protected and told honestly. And that is what I am committed to, because I was there. I know what I saw. And I am not going to stay silent while his name is dragged through the mud by people who once called him family and now call him something else entirely because there is money in it. That is the truth. That is all of it. Take it for what it is.